Since we have attendees from all over the world, I'd like to wish you good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Lori Bush-Shepard, VP of Marketing at Mobify, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our discussion on eliminating barriers to mobile conversions for Black Friday 2017. Our panelists today are Peter McLaughlin, Chief Product Officer at Mobify, Andrew Mota, Senior Director of Interactive Strategy at Astound Commerce, and I'll be your host. Some housekeeping details before we get started. You can submit questions on the Q&A dashboard on your webinar console, so please submit them throughout the presentation. We'll be taking questions at the end in a Q&A period. Also, you can submit questions and keep up with the conversation on Twitter if you'd like, using the hashtag #PWABlackFriday. The webinar is being recorded, and you'll get a link via email to the on-demand playback, and we do encourage you to share that with your colleagues. So first, let's start with some background on our topic. Despite mobile traffic having surpassed desktop traffic, mobile revenue continues to lag. This is about to change, but not for all retailers. Mobile revenue will surpass desktop revenue by Black Friday 2017, but only for retailers who are able to break through the barriers to mobile conversion. The question is, how can your brand be among the winners? In today's session, our panelists will explore how mobile trends are changing, the barriers to mobile conversion, and how to break through the barriers to have a happy shopping season. To get us started, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Peter McLaughlin, who will take us into the first section.
Thank you very much, Lori, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. Andrew and I, your hosts, are privileged to meet and speak with a lot of retailers in the course of our day-to-day work, and it's certainly a challenging time out there in the retail landscape. There's real fear and uncertainty. However, I think that the most the best days of retail are still in the future. The most exciting days of retail are still in the future. We're in the process, maybe in the middle of a real reinvention of how retail is done, where people buy, and I think that there's a real opportunity right now to capitalize on the change that's happening. The speed of that change for leaders will result in very big wins. So just having a look at some of the challenges that we see today is really the change that's come about as a kind of result of the mass adoption, especially over the last couple of years, and growth in smartphones in the Western world, whether that's in the US or Western Europe. And I feel like I've been saying this for quite a long time that mobile this is the biggest year for mobile, but this really is, for the majority of retailers that I'm speaking to, the year that mobile traffic surpassed desktop traffic. So this is where all the organic growth is, and there is growth here. Most retailers that I speak to are seeing significant growth on mobile. Now, for the not so good news, which is that most retailers I speak to are also seeing a very little growth or even flat growth on desktop and tablet. Now, that might not be too much of a problem if it weren't for the fact that typically they're seeing across the board mobile converting at about 1/3 of their desktop traffic. So, only 1 in every 3 visitors on mobile compared to on desktop is buying from them. So if you have growth goals, and virtually every business I know of has growth goals, those goals are going to seem to be receding onto the horizon and getting further and further away with every ounce of additional traffic that starts coming in from the smartphone. Most consumers we found are these days are not downloading your mobile app, but they do visit your mobile site. And the fact that people are visiting and there's huge growth here is really an indicator and should be a leading indicator to you of what your preferences are of the people visiting you. They want to have a great experience. And I feel that retailers have overly focused on the apps of responsive design, both of which don't do the most for to convert your shoppers. And the problem with the first approach is reach. The problem with the app is that most people won't go through the App Store install. And the problem with the second is really about the quality of the experience. If we look at the data here, mobile really is the busiest storefront, but it's not converting well. So this data is aggregate data that's been analyzed by Mobify's insights team, and they've made projections that look into the future to see where things are going for mobile revenue. So we know that more than half of traffic today is coming in on mobile, but what does that mean for revenue? Mobify's customers, our first customers, started making more revenue on mobile than they did on desktop last holiday shopping season. By this holiday shopping season, I think that there will be an entire pack of leaders who are making more revenue mobile than they are elsewhere, and that this gap between the leader and the lag represents incremental revenue that's won as a result of being able to capitalize on mobile moments that really capture the visitor's attention and capture the wallet share while you have that particular moment. Because if someone walks away from the experience, the chances are they're not going to be coming back. To get into more of the details of that, I'm going to pass this over to Andrew, who will be walking you through the barriers to mobile conversion and the reason why, some of the reasons why we think that desktop is still converting better than mobile.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone. So yeah, I'm Andrew Mota. I am the Senior Director of Interactive Strategy at Astound Commerce, and what that really means is that I lead the UX practice. So we've got a lot of experience. We work with many different leading e-commerce platforms. We do a lot of work with Demandware, Hybris, NetSuite, Magento, Oracle, and really for some leading globally recognizable brands. And one of the things that I want to cover is what Peter mentioned earlier, the fact that mobile is converting so much more poorly than desktop. In desktop conversion rates, we're seeing well north of 3%. Even a good mobile conversion rate today is 1.5%. And I mentioned that we work with a lot of these leading e-commerce platforms, and kind of across the board, they really all suffer from this same deficit. So what I want to address today are some of the user experience reasons why we see this gap. So if you look at what kind of the critical user experience differences are with mobile, I mean, there's the ones that I want to talk about. Screen size, obviously, it's a small screen on a phone. Usage patterns, so where people are and what they're doing when they're using their mobile phone. Performance, which is really a key issue, and user input challenges, which is something else that is kind of a unique challenge on the mobile platform. So let's talk about user usage patterns and screen size. Mobile phones are small, so you're not going to be able to and there's nothing you can do about that, right? So really, you have to think of that as something that you can take advantage of to increase your conversion rates. There are other things like context, right? So with phones, interruptions are more likely. In general, what we see is that users on the mobile phone are performing more specific tasks, right? They're looking for a specific product. They're doing significantly less browsing and are doing more focused activities. So, browsing on the desktop, seeing the full breadth of product, kind of meandering, through a website is common on a desktop, but way less common on a mobile phone. So what can you do about this? Well, there are a few things. One is you can guide the mobile experience, right? So sometimes using specialty categories and featuring specialty categories like, trends or shop the look or most popular items. What you really need to do is focus those mobile users, right? So, I won't say you should limit their choices, but you should focus their choices and get them into conversion mode. You should simplify experiences, right? Primary content front and center. The idea of cramming everything that you'd see on a desktop into a mobile phone really sells short, the mobile experience. And another thing to think about with mobile is not just, it's not just a smaller desktop. Mobile also offers you some unique capabilities. So, it has things like GPS, it has a camera, it has an accelerometer, it's got voice, and it's a phone, so it's got phone capabilities. Other things like push notifications, and the opportunity to take advantage of omni-channel. I mean, nobody's going to have their desktop when they're in your store if you have brick and mortar. So really taking advantage of the benefits that mobile offers. Trying to get the screen to advance. There we go. Performance is the next thing that I think is really one of the primary things that's holding back mobile conversion rates from improving. So I'm sure you've all seen these statistics that something like a 1-second delay can result in a 7% drop in conversion rate. And I always like to think that slower page load is cumulative, right? So it's not just one frustration the first time they come to the site. It's something they experience with every click. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. I mean, I don't think people spend enough time optimizing their desktop sites, but for mobile, it matters even more. You also have the issue of connection reliability, which generally you don't have as much concern with on the desktop. So, sometimes your phone connection's fast, sometimes it's slow, sometimes you have no connection at all. And that actually is another big issue with mobile sites, with responsive sites, is that if you have no connection, you have no user experience whatsoever. You just get a page can't load screen. And I'm going to talk a little bit about native apps and how they're different. And that's one advantage that native apps have over something like a responsive experience, is the ability to provide some sort of experience even without an internet connection. Another important point, I mean, performance always matters, but performance also affects SEO. So getting your site found and getting it found on mobile, optimizing the experience is really, really important. Another sort of unique issue with mobile phones is input. Users hate to type on their phones. I hate to type on my phone. I've had an iPhone for 8 years. I still can't type on the thing. So really anything you can do to minimize user input is important. And so taking advantage of new technologies like Apple Pay, using PayPal, things that allow people to check out quickly without re-entering data that they've already entered somewhere else, those can really increase conversion rates. And then just doing a lot of the basic kind of what I call the user experience blocking and tackling, right? How you format your form fields, how you label your form fields, what your error, how specific your error messaging is, how it's displayed. It's really easy to ignore the fact, of how small a screen size is. And this example, that's on the screen right now, shows a portrait phone, but a lot of people, when they're checking out, will go to landscape mode. And when you're in landscape mode on a phone, you're really only going to see kind of one of those lines at a time. So it can really impact what the user experience is. You've got to pay close attention to all of those issues. Any personal data that you can remember so that users don't have to input it again, making sure that you don't require data or information that's really not required, and making decisions not to show information that's not required, just because really a single error or a single mistype on a phone can kill a potential conversion. So now I want to talk about native versus web. So native mobile apps, can produce some really stellar conversion rates, well north of 5%. And I've heard arguments. Well, the people who install those mobile apps, they're self-selecting, they're more likely to convert, and and that may be part of it. But I think a significant piece of it is that native can overcome those performance barriers. Native apps are typically, you don't build a native app for desktop and then port it to a mobile phone. You build the experience specifically for the mobile phone. And that makes a difference. That it's really a bespoke experience. It's tuned to the mobile user. And it takes advantage of all of those hardware options that we talked about, that you can really do some interesting things that just aren't available on desktop. And when I think about, standard responsive technology, which, I do think like standard responsive technology was a giant leap forward, right? It was revolutionary compared to a desktop optimized experience. But it really doesn't take advantage of everything the phone has to offer. So what are the drawbacks of native? Well, as Peter mentioned, it's adoption, right? There's app fatigue. I don't want to install another app on my phone. I don't want to go, I don't want to go to the app store and have to download it and maybe enter my password. That it's a real thing, that we really see this app fatigue. So native apps are great if you can get users to adopt them, but getting them to adopt is a real challenge, and requires a lot of effort. And so, when I think about responsive compared to native, I think, well, that's a huge advantage of responsive, is that, nobody has to install anything on their phone. They can just go right to the site. And again, one of the things that I think native shows is that there really is a lot of headroom for getting out of that, 1.5% or less conversion rate. When I say that I think responsive was a revolutionary technology. So believe it or not, some people still have websites that don't have any sort of mobile optimization. So when you go to the site, you get a desktop site on your phone. And believe it or not, e-commerce sites that behave that way actually do have a conversion rate, and that conversion rate is typically about 1/3 of a responsive conversion rate. But going from 1.5% to that 3%, or even if you get to 2%, 2.5%, those are huge differences. One of the things that I saw just yesterday was a graphic from Luke Roboleski, who's a big mobile UX guy, talked about the fact that if you look at how many mobile phones there are compared to how many desktop computers there's something like 10x more mobile phones, and that number's only growing. So, when you talk about traffic, most retailers have hit the 50% mark on traffic, and the growth opportunities are there. And if you just purely look at the numbers, it reaffirms that that's the big opportunity. And so, and I think responsive has been a big step in getting us there, right? In that it makes the phone at least somewhat useful as a platform for this. But there are a lot of reasons why responsive technology falls short for e-commerce. One of the things about responsive is, the general philosophy of responsive, which kind of, bootstrapped it up, is that everything that's on your desktop site should be on your phone. Like pre-responsive, people might create mobile sites, but they might just be really stripped down versions of their desktop site. But the idea that all the content on your desktop should be on your phone. And I think that's a great philosophy, but not necessarily a great philosophy for e-commerce. Because as we mentioned, particularly with e-commerce, there are different usage patterns, and really responding to those usage patterns is what's going to make the difference and going to take you from 1.5% to 3% on the phone, which is going to be huge. Responsive has some built-in performance problems too, right? So they're typically fairly large frameworks. There are issues with responsive images. You're either loading an image that's too big for your phone. Sometimes, depending on the solution, you're loading multiple images onto the phone and only showing one, so you're using way more bandwidth than you need to. There's the fact that responsive doesn't necessarily feel like it belongs on a phone, right? And that it doesn't kind of have that native responsiveness. You know, and that's in terms of just how the interface flows, as well as you know, how it responds, how pages load, that it can just feel clunky. And then I guess my final big point, you know, we've talked a lot in recent years in UX about mobile first, you know, design for the mobile platform first. And, you know, despite that, and having worked on, you know, dozens and dozens of large e-commerce sites, I feel like that doesn't really happen. That really design takes place on the desktop. There's still a huge focus on the desktop, and the mobile site generally becomes a smaller version of the desktop site. And that's just really, you know, selling short the opportunity that's there. So just to, I think I've covered all of the pieces I want to cover. Just to kind of sum up, you know, my main points from a user experience point of view are: you need to create an experience for the phone, and it's not the same as desktop. Performance is key, and you know, finding solutions that really overcome that performance problem is really important. And finally, you need to take advantage of the unique platform capabilities, right? And this is, you know, part and parcel of designing experience for the phone. Is you've got more capabilities, you need to use them to get your users engaged and to get them to convert. So that's all I've got. I'm going to hand it back over to Peter now, and he's going to talk about the solution to some of these problems, which is progressive web apps.
Thanks so much, Andrew. So I think, you know, we've all had a chance to hear a little bit about the reasons why we don't see conversion rates as high on mobile as some of us would like, as some of us would expect. But I think I'd like to also spend a moment to talk about a little bit of depth the opportunity that exists here. I think that a lot of retailers that I speak to, when they're not familiar with progressive web apps and other new technologies, are almost resigned to that 1/3 conversion rate. And so they feel that, you know, at conversion rate being 1/3 of desktop, they think that they're doing, you know, good enough. You know, the thing that I would like to emphasize is that you can do a lot better, that an average Mobify customer is doing 50% more than that. And leaders from our customer set are up at 70 to 80% of the desktop conversion rate. So there's real differences that exist in conversion rates between having a great experience, and these exist across verticals. And this doesn't even account for the fact that more than 50% of sales, no matter what channel they happen on, have some kind of mobile touch point. Deloitte and a lot of other surveys have found that you know, mobile is essentially people's digital primary key. This is where they're doing pre-shopping as well as buying, and it's crucial that they get a great experience. So how can you actually deliver that great experience? Well, as Andrew mentioned, there's a new technology player in town called a progressive web app. Now, this is a screenshot taken directly from Google's site on progressive web apps, and I thought that I could point to that as the authoritative source on the matter. I think it's important to be aware that although Google is endorsing progressive web apps and promoting them, they don't own the technology. Everything about a progressive web app is part of a web standard technology. So let's dissect the name of them to begin with. So what's progressive about them? What's progressive is something called progressive enhancement, which is just that you should have the best experience that is possible for the device and screen that you're using. That's what the progressive means. Web, well, this runs out of a web browser. And the app part is critical here. This is a lot more like building a native app than it ever was about building a website. So app-like experiences, we're going to talk a lot more about what it means to have an app experience, but I think you should focus on the fact that fundamentally it means having something that looks and feels as if it belongs on your phone. So these are the key attributes of a progressive web app. So the first and foremost is that it is reliable. What we mean by reliable is that it works even when your network conditions are poor. and that it should tell you when your network conditions, in fact, are unusable in a way that's friendly. So it should maintain your branding and make sure that you are aware of what's going on, and you don't get the infamous dinosaur, which if you've ever used Chrome, you're familiar with. It's this funny looking dinosaur in blocky, pixelated form. Or if you're a Safari on iOS user, you get this, Safari cannot load the page, it's gray background. These are unbranded experiences. These are poor quality experiences. Why wouldn't you allow your visitors to continue to view content that they've already seen? Why wouldn't you want that experience to be as good as it could possibly be? The next aspect of a progressive web app is that it should be fast. So a fast experience is something that's going to react to your touches in less than 50 milliseconds. Maybe it's going to take longer for content to fully load from the server. So maybe that's going to take a few hundred milliseconds or 1 or 2 seconds. Depends on your connection speed, depends on a lot of things that are maybe not under your control. But a native application still reacts to the touches that somebody has with it, even if it's waiting for content from the server. If you think about using the Facebook app or the Twitter app, if you step into an elevator and you touch something, the next pane scrolls onto the screen, even if the content isn't there yet. And it'll sit there trying to load, or it'll let you know that it's offline if it's not able to load that content. Third, progressive web apps need to be engaging. You wouldn't consider a native application to be complete if it didn't have push notifications, if it didn't have some way to reach out and get in touch with you and let you know that, that if it didn't have some way of reaching out and letting you know that there was something happening that you might be interested in. And these need to be context aware, aware of where you are, who you are, what you're doing. I think you should forget about the paradigm of web versus app and think about how you do both. Progressive web app is both of these things. It's an app-like user experience, and this example I'm showing you here is a live progressive web app, Lancome USA, that shows you what it, that having a stable navigation experience, having something that does not even have page loads, where everything is progressively loaded into the screen, can be the difference between an experience where you're waiting for each step of the checkout process and something that looks and feels much more like a native app. I've been told that we're having some problems with the audio, so I'm going to mute for just a moment and see whether or not there's, I have an alternative dial-in that I'm just going to switch to see whether or not that clears things up. Give me just 30 seconds.
Okay, while Peter does that, we do have a couple of questions that have come in, so maybe I can ask a question of Andrew while we've got a little bit of time here. So Andrew, you had mentioned best practices for user input. Can you elaborate that, and how can I learn more?
Well, sure. I mean, there's a lot of good research, user studies. Again, I call it the basic blocking and tackling. How you label form fields on a mobile device. How where the error messages show up, and how specific the error messages are. I mean, error messages on mobile are kind of death. So preventing those at any cost. And even things like, if you've got a tooltip or like, for instance, a formatting for phone number. Right, is that even if you don't enforce the formatting, people still want to see what the formatting is. People don't like the ambiguity of entering a phone number and not knowing if they're going to have a problem because it's the wrong format. So just taking the steps to prevent all those simple little preventable things. Yeah, there's a lot of research. We've actually assembled kind of a huge library of best practices. We have part of our practice does essentially every year, and it's a 20-year-old study where we study the feature set of the leading e-commerce sites. And there's also, since mobile's been around, we've been doing it for mobile too. And so you can find that on the Astound Commerce website. You can download, I think you can download an overview of the last 20 years, as well as find out more about about those studies. And if you're interested in learning more, you can certainly get in touch with me, and I will be happy to talk to you about what we can do for you.
Terrific. And also, Mobify has done a webinar on UX best practices. Astound was a sponsor of that webinar. If you'd like to go to the mobify.com website, visit our resources section, and you should find the UX webinar there. And there's also a report that you can download. Peter, do we have you back? If not, we'll go ahead to another question that we've got for Andrew.
I believe that I am back. How is the connection now?
Phenomenally better. Thank you very much, Peter. We'll hand it back over to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think you've now seen this video that shared a little bit about what an app like UX looks like. And just to recap a little bit, just to play through it again. I'm not sure how much of that was lost in the choppy audio. And what you can see about this experience is that the way it flows and the way the navigation is up at the top is much more like a native application. It looks and feels like it belongs on the phone. It's easy to move between categories. It's easy to access a menu. It's easy to purchase. And as I navigate from one part of the experience to another, we can see that everything flows. In fact, it reacts instantaneously to the touches of the visitor, and that instantaneous reaction results in better conversion rates and a better overall experience by the customer. Now, that's really just the beginning of what you're getting when you move to a progressive web app. Progressive web app allows for scheduled and triggered push notifications. So coming back to that idea of being an engaging experience, a good example of one of these is an abandoned cart notification. It's not unusual to have disruptions happen when you're interacting with your phone. So for example, let's say you're waiting for an elevator, classic example, or you enter a tunnel. All kinds of other circumstances can cause an interruption to you or a disruption of your network connectivity. Wouldn't it be great if you were reminded to complete the task that you were almost finished? In practice, we see conversion rates over 10% when our customers implement cart abandonment push notifications. Web applications have been installable to the home screen for some time via this bookmark function. However, that bookmark function was really a very incomplete way to get onto the home screen. For starters, the shopper needed to initiate that action themselves. It was not something that you as the retailer could actually come up and ask them, would you like to install this to your home screen? Progressive web app gives you the power to be able to do that, which means that you can actually use engagement metrics from how your visitor is behaving on your site to decide when are you going to ask them, is it the right moment to install on your home screen? Additional benefits, once it's installed on the home screen, that progressive web application now looks and feels even more like a native app. For example, you'll notice that there's no more URL bar when the visitors launched the experience from the icon on the home screen. There was a splash screen that showed up when the application was launched. And when you go to switch applications inside of the phone, it will show up as a separate application, not inside of the visitor's web browser. So it really is about promoting this experience to be something that's first class, that looks and feels like it belongs on the phone. Progressive web apps should have even more than that. They should have the ability to work even when the experience is offline. So for example, we should be able to give the visitor notice when we put the phone into airplane mode that that we're currently in airplane mode and that the experience may not work quite the way the visitor intended. And they should still be able to navigate and change pages and visit content that they've seen before, but the final experience, they may not be able to load new content. I have a great slogan that I call "Start fast, stay fast." So we've talked a lot about the more complicated part of that, which is staying fast. How do you stay fast once the visitor's actually loaded your experience? Now, the startup fast is addressed by a new piece of technology called accelerated mobile pages. They've been around for a while, for a couple of years in the publishing world, but they're still very, very new in the e-commerce space. In fact, Mobify's customer and eBay are among the only two first first early launches of this for e-commerce as a technology. What it does is allows virtually instant loading of experiences. On LTE, it's not uncommon for an accelerated mobile page to load from a search engine result in less than a second. And that experience of less than a second is something that's visually communicated to people in search results. So if you see a search result and you see a little tiny label that says AMP with a lightning bolt, that's an accelerated mobile page. People are learning how to discern accelerated mobile pages in the search results. So they're getting more and more likely to click on them because they know they're going to have a fast experience when they click on this search result. So I'm just going to kind of slow this down for a moment here and give you an example of exactly what that looks like. See if I can grab it at just the right moment. Oh, it's a little too difficult. All right, well, we'll share this a little bit later, and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to these search results. To conclude, mobile experiences that are going to convert well need to be simple. They need to look and feel like they belong on the phone. They need to be immediate, which means that it needs to be fast. We can't be waiting 5 seconds or 10 seconds or anywhere close to what is currently the average, which is close to 20 seconds for pages to load. We need them there almost instantly. And that's really some of the magic that apps are giving people. It's something that feels like it was meant to be on the phone and is fast enough to hold people's attention and to get a job done in a limited amount of time that we have when we're usually interacting with our phones. And finally, it needs to be timely and relevant with respect to engagement. So that means that we need to present information either inside of the experience or through push notifications that matters to the person who's interacting and is individualized for them. The only way to do this is with a platform. Unless you have a giant engineering team of dozens of engineers, you are going to be looking at building out big data systems. You're going to be looking at building out instrumentation for front-end components. You're going to be looking at component libraries for a variety of new screens. Accelerated mobile page components are completely different than progressive web app components, for example. And unless you have the intelligence that sits underneath them, you really need to look at this as a platform play where you're going to be customizing something that's doing all of these things for you. And that's the reason why you've probably invested in other systems of record like a CRM or your e-commerce engine. There's some retailers that still do build those in-house, but most retailers have realized that they can't maintain velocity over time without having a very large team to maintain them. Platforms give you a higher point of departure, so they should get you 90% of the way there, and you should just need to do a small amount of customization. It should not limit your flexibility as a business, but it should mean that you need to do a lot less work. You need analytics and intelligence baked in from the get-go. So that means that every interaction should be instrumented. So you should be able to understand when you do have to have form fields in your checkout flow, like for example, if someone doesn't have Apple Pay enabled, you probably do need to ask them, what is their address? What is their credit card number? And you want to really understand what the drop-off is going to be between one field to the next field. If you want to do that with your current analytics package, you're going to do a lot of time customizing that workflow. If you use a platform, everything comes instrumented out of the box, and you could do those analyses instantly. There's a lot of innovation in this space right now. Are you ready for chat commerce, for voice commerce, for the future of augmented reality in a store that is going to be virtually everywhere in our environment? A great platform for commerce engagement will provide a scalable architecture that extends to these new channels, which means that you don't have to bet on what's going to work or not work. There will be an inexpensive way to be there, get your feet in the water and get there fast, beat out your competitors. Performance today is too often an afterthought. What I typically see is a responsive project that takes 6 to 12 months, usually about 6 months longer than a retailer was expecting, and it goes live only to have very disappointing results. And usually there's a bunch of reasons for those disappointing results, but a big one is speed. And then they undertake another performance fix, which takes another 3 months as the engineering team goes back and revisits the performance of every page. That results in some improvements. And then, of course, there are more marketing tags that need to be placed into the experience, and things slow down again after that. The only way to work around this sort of release, slow down, evaluate, optimize, release cycle is to have complete tested code coverage that includes performance regression. So you understand with each change that you're making, what were the performance impacts of that? in our code base, the way that we maintain our platform, something that we look at is, did we make anything any slower? Because that's just not acceptable. The teams need to go back. If they make a code commit with automated tests, we know straight away that that commit slowed things down. And even if it's adding new features and functionality, then the team needs to go back and they need to understand how they could still implement that functionality without slowing anything down. And last but not least, the platform really should keep you ahead of the latest technology. When iOS 11 comes out, Android 8, Accelerated Mobile Pages is undergoing rapid feature development right now. There are major feature releases happening every 2 to 3 months. You shouldn't have to worry about those things. You should have a platform that's doing most of the work for you. Mobify's platform is the only platform that I'm aware of that uses progressive web apps as the cornerstone, but provides solutions for accelerated mobile pages, push notification, the marketing automation, and intelligence that needs to underlie smart push notifications, full native applications on iOS and Android. So when and if it is right for your business to extend into the App Store, you can do that. Store drivers, so the ability to look at and understand where your shoppers are and to promote store experiences to them in search engine results, if that makes sense for your business. The ability to integrate fully native payment methods easily, things like Web Payments API, are going to change the game for mobile conversion rates in the next few months. And you need a front-end platform that's there for you. Smart content is about providing a contextually relevant experience for your shoppers so that they know, that they're standing in New York, or they're standing in LA, or they're standing in London, and that you can give them something that is unique and custom to how they behave, who they are, or where they are. I'm very proud that a Mobify customer, Lancome USA, won the 2017 Internet Retailer Excellence Award for mobile commerce, beating out eBay and Wayfair, who are both are very strong runners-up. And this award honors a retailer showing creativity, performance, and sales growth. And the business results for Lancome in implementing the platform have been absolutely tremendous, and something that we're happy to share as a case study for anyone who's interested. I don't expect you to just take my word for it. Certainly, Google is investing heavily in this as a direction, and I think that certainly deserves consideration from retailers, given that a sizable chunk of your paid and organic traffic probably originate from Google. But others have joined in here as well. So we see both Forrester and Gartner endorsing progressive web apps as the future of technology for how retail is going to be happening, primarily in the U.S. and Western Europe going forward. Now, before we go, I do want to pass things back just to Andrew one more time, just to have a chance to summarize some of the changes and improvements that we see from progressive web apps.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I really just reiterate a lot of what Peter said. I mean, performance, once again, I mean, it's often overlooked, and I've had the same experience he has of nobody's thinking about performance during the design phase of a responsive site. They're always thinking about it after launch when things aren't going as well as they wanted them to. And again, performance, I think, is just such a critical part of user experience. It's something you need to pay attention to up front. And for me, that's one of the most exciting things about about progressive web apps, about AMP that's coming out. And use the Lancome site. It's phenomenal. It feels great. Just things pop up quickly. Turn it on airplane mode, and you can still see what you've looked at before. I mean, it's the experience is just head and shoulders above what progressive can provide. Yeah, I mean, things like proper touch feedback for interactions, and this is something that a lot of people get wrong, right? Is that the feedback from a button press needs to tell you something. And I've seen too many mobile sites where I think I clicked add to cart, but I'm not sure, and I click it again and I add the same thing to my cart twice. So just little experiential things like that can be improved by a mobile web app. So I'm really excited about this technology and what I've seen about it, and how it grows going forward. And I do think that this level of performance is what it's going to take to make mobile phone an equal partner, and with as good as or better than conversion rates than the desktop.
Great, thanks very much, both of you, for your presentations, and we'll now get into the question and answer portion of our program. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to put them into the questions portion of your webinar console. And we do have a few questions coming in about getting the recording, and we will indeed be following up in the next few days with a replay, so watch your email and feel free to share it with your colleagues. So a couple questions here. So first off, one for Andrew. Well, actually, I think you just answered that question, is how does Astound see progressive web apps, actually it's a little bit broader, fitting into the broader e-commerce technology landscape?
Well, as I mentioned before, I mean, there are quite a few e-commerce platforms out there. All of them pretty much rely on responsive as their out-of-the-box technology solution. I think they tend, because they're focused so much on the commerce end, I think they tend to be a little bit behind in mobile advancement. And, for me, that's another great thing about Mobify, is that it's going to work with any of these commerce platforms. So it lets you plug in the solution. And, as Peter maintained, I mean, the thing I like about the big e-commerce platforms is, they're working hard for you every day to stay up on the technology so that you don't have to. So the idea of having a platform that supports progressive web apps, that you don't have to maintain, a huge engineering team to keep going, I think is critical. And I would, again, the solution I see right now is, is Mobify, and yeah, it works well with all the platforms that we're working with today.
I just want to add one observation there, which is that I think the change that we see coming is really a stronger separation of concerns between the front end and the back end. And some of you may have heard a phrase called headless commerce, and this is really about treating the concerns of the system of record, the commerce engine, which is about order management, payment acquisition, product information management, and these things are all critical systems of record, and they really move at a different speed of innovation than consumer technology. And there needs to be a nice layer of abstraction that separates the e-commerce platform from what's happening in the front end. And that's what Mobify is providing, and I'm sure that we will see other platforms that are realizing this opportunity as well. We know that on the e-com side, they're definitely seeing this. They've realized that their strength is not HTML templating, especially given that that's sort of the way of the past, and will be sort of a footnote in history pretty soon. They've realized that their strength, of course, is scalability, robustness, and management of the very complex backend ecosystem, and that there is a need to abstract away the front end and the complexity of all the different screens and all the different ways that shoppers are now interacting with the e-com platforms.
Thank you both. One for Peter here. We just did a responsive site. What do I do now?
Uh-oh, you're in trouble. No, I'm just kidding. You probably did the right thing. I mean, chances are that you did see some bump from the responsive site. I've encountered a few retailers who have actually had slightly negative results, but very few. The mass majority did get an improvement from the responsive site, just maybe not the improvement that they were hoping for, and certainly not where they were seeing something like near parity on mobile conversion rate relative to desktop. And I don't know hardly any retailers that got that result from a responsive site. So the answer is probably look at what you look at this by the numbers. So do an evaluation. Something that Mobify can help you do is to based on your analytics, make a projection of what where you're at today and what is the revenue opportunity that you could realize, and you can make a call. It doesn't make sense to do a progressive web app now. Does it make sense to do one later? What am I leaving on the table? What is it going to cost? And you can essentially do this by the numbers. And that's something, as someone who who's focused on product management, that's something that we do all the time. Is, you know, essentially we can let the numbers do the talking and figure it out with math.
Great, thanks. Here's another one that's come in. I've heard that progressive web apps are only for Android. Do they work on iOS too?
Sure. Yeah. So that's where the progressive part of progressive web apps is really the part to emphasize. The progressive really means these experiences should work everywhere, including iOS, but they should take advantage of features that exist only, you know, that might only exist on one device. So we shouldn't make these things the least common denominator, which is something that's unfortunately that was how we handled things with responsive. Was, you know, we say, okay, you know, some phones are not so capable, so we're going to make the experience kind of bad for everybody. Progressive is taking the opposite approach, which is like, let's make the experience as great as it can be everywhere that it is. And that includes iOS, which does lag a little bit on web features. You know, we're all looking to Apple and hoping that they'll have a renewed emphasis on shipping those features, and those features are all web standards. So there's a reason to believe that they'll get there eventually, that they're just a little bit behind on getting there right now.
Great. Here's another question that's come in. Will mobile platforms with progressive web apps and AMP replace enterprise commerce systems by integrating directly to back-end systems?
Yeah, no, I don't believe so. That's a great question, but I think that there really is an important separation of concerns around the layer. Like, there's a data layer that gets presented to all of the, you know, sort of the interfaces that are actually interacting with the user, whether that's voice or you know, a screen, and whether that screen is native app or even a desktop. And I think that we're going to see more and more emphasis on that abstraction of everything that happens in the front end. But I still think that e-commerce platforms are playing a crucial role that's not, that, you know, would not be easily replaced especially for most organizations that, you know, in many cases the e-commerce platform is also playing a role in order management, is certainly playing a role in payment acquisition, etc. Chances are, you know, the only thing that might happen that would disrupt that even a little bit would be adding a service bus that might sit on top of the e-commerce platform, but that e-commerce platform is probably still going to be there.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment, and I do think, you know, if you think about the, you know, really the breadth of what that, you know, think about it as the data layer and the business logic on the back end, that I think even trying to get rid of the front end abstraction would be problematic. I mean, best case scenario is you've got a standard set of APIs that you can call to get data and imagery and whatever you need, and you've got a completely standalone presentation layer that gives you the most flexibility. Whereas if you tied the presentation layer to your backend systems, I think you'd have a lot of problems. So yeah, I think they're going to be around for quite a while.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Kind of tying into the e-commerce platforms discussion, here's one that says, I'm in the middle of switching e-commerce platforms. Should I wait to do a progressive web app until after I'm done? And at which step of the process should I start on a progressive web app?
Thanks, Laurie. I can take that one, or at least I can take a first stab at it. Then maybe Andrew, you could add to fill in what I miss. But usually, this is a very good opportunity to evaluate progressive web apps because you're likely doing a redesign anyway at this stage, and something that you'll want to look at when you are undertaking a progressive web app is thinking about how, you know, you can make that UX more app-like, and you probably are going to want to do more than just sort of like make your responsive site instant loading. You're going to want to rethink some aspects of the UX, and usually during replatforming, you're doing that anyway, so you can save cost by evaluating it now, and you can roll out the progressive web app and a responsive site for any screens that you're not supporting on the progressive web app simultaneously.
Yeah, and I would concur with that. I think it's a great opportunity, and even better still, I think when some people are replatforming, there's a big focus on, well, let's just make it do exactly what it did before. But if you're focusing on progressive web app, then you're going to focus more on the mobile experience in general, which I think is what everybody needs to be doing, you know, based just on the numbers that we've looked at. So I think doing a progressive web app simultaneously can help to focus you on the right things as you change platforms.
Great. Here's a question. Peter, maybe you wanted to start with this one. Is this a technology that Google provides?
Yeah, great question, and it's easy to see why people are concerned that this is a Google-specific technology. It isn't. It's all. In fact, even calling progressive web apps a technology wouldn't be quite the right thing. It's more like responsive web design in that it is more about a philosophy and approach than it is, and that does use a bunch of different technologies. That it is a kind of singular thing, and the technologies that a progressive web app uses as a philosophy are all part of the web standards. So certainly Google sits on the standards body that defines those standards, but so does Apple, and then so does Microsoft, and so do a number of other big players.
Great, thank you. Here's another one, interesting one. Do you see a bigger impact of progressive web apps for millennials?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly we do see a preference towards more app-like interactions, and of course, like more touch-first interactions for millennials and Gen Z. Younger audiences are less patient, but I can't say that I have specific data where I can, kind of cite an exact number.
Yeah, and
great.
All of our user research, again, I think impatience. They're familiar with the technology. They have higher expectations than than other generations.
Okay, thank you. Then there's another question that's come in. What is the direction content management systems are taking to support different platforms for desktop and mobile in the progressive web app context?
So I've seen a number of different directions coming from different content management systems. I see more CMSs, a little bit more on the startup side than on the sort of very established side, but that are moving towards more of a headless content management system approach, where they see themselves as providing the back office tools to marketing teams to manage the content, to present the right content, decision making and intelligence, but being less concerned about actually generating the HTML that gets consumed by the device at the end of the day. And that's so that they can inject content directly into e-commerce engines if necessary, or deliver content very smoothly to things like a progressive web app or anywhere that content might be needed. So that they're sort of seeing the same thing there as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that they're really separating presentation from content, and you see that a lot more. They all still will generate HTML and generate presentation, but everyone, even the big commerce players, are looking at like much more flexible delivery of data so that you can grab and load what you need when it's appropriate.
Great, and with that, we've reached the top of the hour. If there are other questions that have come in through direct chat or through the Q&A, actually I think we got everything off the Q&A, but through direct chat and through Twitter, we'll get back to you separately via email. And just a reminder, this has been recorded, so if you have any further, if you'd like to see it again, if you'd like to share it with your colleagues, just be watching for your email for the on-demand playback. If you'd like to learn more, you can also visit the resources section of Mobify.com. We've got our latest and greatest mobile commerce insights report. It's a quarterly report that we issue that can give you some more information. And once again, many thanks to Andrew Mota from Astound and to Peter McLaughlin from Mobify for the presentations today. We really hope you found the session to be informative and helpful, and thanks to all of you for joining us.